Now, in terms of outlook, as you can see, it's a mixed. Again, I started off my presentation by saying it's a mixed bag, and here it's a mixed bag. And you'll see some of the stuff, kind of is a little bit at odds with each other. Most, 77.5%, so they expected to grow in the coming year. And you can see the majority of that is, they expect to grow less than 10%. But they're still, healthy, 6.5%, so they expect to grow more than 10%. In 2012, 9.4 said they expected to grow significantly. However, overall, more respondents this year than last year expected to grow. So there's a healthy amount of optimism. Having, and as I referenced in the beginning, that's more optimistic than most of what the national surveys show. Having said that, and this is the, I call it a sober finding, far more firms this year, far more respondents are saying they expect to shrink next year. Which is really kind of odd. Now, maybe that goes to the whole stratification issue, where you're either moving up or you're moving down, but you're not staying pat. But in last year's survey, only 6.5% said they expected to shrink at all. This year, 19.4 expect to shrink. And that's something. Actually, I screwed that one thing up. So 6.5% expect to shrink significantly. Nobody said that last year. Nobody. And overall, 19.4 expect to shrink, and that's versus only 6.3% last year. And I will tell you that in terms of the makeup of the size of the firms, it's fairly consistent from year to year. So again, what does that mean? I'm not sure. It's just something we're going to have to wait out. I mean, the one thing that's interesting is, we had a couple firm implosions the last couple of years. Wolf Block was really the only major one that affected the Pennsylvania market. We haven't seen it since. You still know, I guess you never know. You never know. We haven't, I will tell you that there's always questions people have about certain firms, how are they doing, but it hasn't been any kind of, heated whispering in terms of, who's in trouble and who's not. But given that, if you're shrinking in this economy, it's not a good thing. Layoffs. As you can see, 16.7% said they laid off staff, and that was still down from 2012 when 21.9% said they laid off staff. Here's the thing, though. So 13.3% said they expect to lay off staff in the coming year, and that's up from last year. So, and again, given everything we've seen and we've heard, I think it's really going to come. I think if it happens, it will come without much warning. I think a lot of firms right now, it's the quickest way to sort of improve the books, and if things start out slow, that's when, I think, you'll look for it. Typically, I think we see these things typically towards the end of the first quarter and towards around the second quarter. That's typically when these things happen. So, that's something to keep an eye out for. Only 3.2% this year said they laid off attorneys in the past year. However, 16% said they expect to do it next year. And that's in the same ballpark as the previous surveys. Another interesting little point is that one of the things that anecdotally we're hearing, though, is that there's sort of a need for a certain level of, that between the layoffs a couple years ago and the reduced size of the new associates and this reduced, summer associate programs, that there's sort of a need, though, in certain practice areas for a certain level of associates, and they're not there. So that's something that, I think will be interesting to watch how that plays out and whether or not, to some degree, there's talk that for that kind of level of work, there's a lack of talent out there because of all the cuts that have come before. So it'll be interesting to see. Again, if you look at all the national surveys and national recommendations from consultants, they shouldn't be focusing on associates anyway. They should be focusing on the underperforming partners. And as I said on here, and I said at the beginning, I think layoffs and headcount reduction are going to still be on the table in a tough environment. One of the things that we've heard repeatedly from talking to managing partners, chairs, practice heads, most people are, again, most of the firm leaders in Pennsylvania, I think, are reasonably optimistic. But time and again, they will tell you it's tough out there. It's tough growing revenue. They've all really adjusted sort of their attitudes about it. I think I talked about this in the forecast article. If you look at the last post-recession, I think the best year any firm has had is really around 7-8%. And that's really fluctuated over the last several years. So in other words, whoever was the top performer in terms of growing revenue from year to year, it changes every time. No one's been consistent. Most of the firms, I think if you look at the firm, a snapshot, and now granted, this is the AmLaw 100, AmLaw 200 firms. But then again, we're not hearing anything that firms below that are finding things any differently than that. But if you look at the AmLaw 200 firms, how they performed financially since, since 2000, since 2008, if you look at the ranges, it's anywhere, slight dips. Now they've kind of leveled off, but basically it's flat, on average, flat to 3 to 4% and then there's a few, anomaly performers who are in this 7 to 8 range. No one's really been higher than that. And even those that have done 7 to 8, there's usually a reason for it. It's a merger, or they got a lot of cast-offs from another firm that imploded, or they got a big, they had a contingent fee agreement and that hit big. So that's something to just keep in mind in terms of this overall sort of context. In terms of hot and cold practice areas, and this has been fairly consistent, and this is one of those things that I mentioned that I think kind of amuses me in some ways. So what's hot? So the 3 practice areas that were identified by the survey's respondents, and this was same as last year, was commercial litigation, IP, and employment. And then that was followed by insurance litigation, M&A, and white collar. Then go look at who didn't fare so well. So bankruptcy, but then insurance litigation, trust and estates, M&A, and employment were cited as ones that weren't going to grow. So I don't always know what's behind all that stuff. I don't know if it's based on size firm or what end of the spectrum you're representing. One interesting thing, though, in terms of the practice areas that were viewed as not likely to be hot. Usually, from year to year, there's more overlap. They're fairly consistent. This year, in their survey, there was only some overlap with 2012's results. And one interesting thing was real estate was missing. I mean, that was one, obviously, after the real estate collapse. That's been a drumbeat as a bad practice area for several years, and that wasn't in the top tier this year in terms of areas that partners thought were going to be poor in 2014.